The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferentz.
A sweet deal for flight attendants at United. How about this? A 31% pay raise and a total of $750 million in back pay. Meanwhile, a nice win for nurses in Chicago. And today on the show, working in hot weather. Where are the protections for workers? Welcome to the Tuesday, June 23rd edition of America's Workforce, where we are available on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Well, it is summertime, and there's a lot of people working in the fields, and in some areas of the country, it is very, very hot. You know, each year, more than 600 people die of heat-related illnesses. And according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, every year, that includes people dying on the job. Our featured guest on the show today is Juanita Constible. She is a senior advocate of environmental health at the Natural Resources Defense Council. The website you want to go to, NRDC.org. Outdoor and indoor heat hazards are a serious threat to the health and safety of working people. But heat-related illnesses, injuries, and deaths can be prevented with common sense solutions. Right now, most workers in the country lack specific enforceable heat protections on the job. And get this, just 7 states out of 50 have some kind of standard on the books, and we have no idea if or when OSHA will finalize its proposed federal heat standard. You know, in the Biden administration, they did move forward, but it never was implemented. And right now, they're pretty much dragging their feet. I got to congratulate the producers of the show, BMA Media. They put together every month the Labor Citizen, and they did a whole page on this, Beat the Heat, and mention about how many people die every year. Interesting facts about water. Lack of water is the number one trigger of daytime fatigue. A 2% drop in body water can create short-term memory problems, trouble with basic math, and difficulty focusing. Consuming between 90 and 125 ounces of liquid a day can ease back and joint pain for about 80% of sufferers. Drinking 5 8-ounce glasses of water a day can decrease the risk of many concerns. You know, sadly, there's a lot of people that are working in the heat that are denied water. That's right, denied water. But there's a lot of stuff, especially on the web. Common sense solutions, working in the heat. And we'll talk about it with our featured guest on the show today, Juanita Constible of the Natural Resources Defense Council. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. We're talking $38 billion of assets under advisement, serving the needs of Taft-Hartley funds, corporations, public funds, endowments, foundations, and religious organizations. And they've been doing this for 98 years, since 1928. You can find more at BoydWatterson.com. Let's start off with some really good news. A 31% pay raise. A 31% pay raise and $750 million in back pay. That's what 30,000 flight attendants at United Airlines, who are unionized with the Association of Flight Attendants, which is part of the Communication Workers of America, secured in their new contract that they just ratified. Now, in addition to that pay raise of 31%, They will get another 12% raise over the next 4 years of the contract. They were also able to secure for the first time compensation for boarding time, which the union says amounts to another 7 to 8% increase in compensation, along with 10 weeks paid maternity leave and more. The union members ratified the contract with 82% in favor and nearly 90% of eligible members voting. So hats off to the flight attendants, all at United Airlines and represented by the Association of Flight Attendants, part of the Communication Workers of America, one of our proud sponsors here on America's Workforce. Now let's go to Chicago, where registered nurses at St. Mary of Nazareth Hospital voted overwhelmingly to join National Nurses United, which is the nation's largest and fastest growing nurses union. In an election held last week, nurses voted 96% yes to forming a union. One of the RNs, Anna Balance, said, "Today is a great day to be a union nurse in Chicago. We are so excited to join the union because we know we'll be able to win the kind of contract that will be a game changer for our patients and for us as nurses." The nurses at the facility, which is in Chicago's Ukrainian Village, held a historic strike. This was 2 weeks ago to protest the illegal firings of 6 coworkers who were unlawfully terminated for trying to organize. Despite the tactics from Prime Healthcare, which is the owner of the hospital, the nurses demonstrated their clear unity and solidarity that carried them to this massive win. Chris Williams is an RN on the 14th floor of the hospital. Chris says Prime Healthcare thought they could scare us into silence, but now that we're part of the country's largest union, our voice is louder than ever, and we're still turning the volume up. We're ready for a contract that makes sure our patients get the care they deserve, not the shortcuts that Prime has been taking. Good news for the nurses in Chicago. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, all about protecting workers from heat. What are the OSHA standards? What needs to be done? That story coming up next, right here on America's Workforce. Don't go away.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy,
and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
The Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 ironworker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great iron worker, whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Ironworkers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting IBEWdistrictcouncil.com. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
Hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland at 216-881-1802. Call Music Talent of Cleveland as your dependable source for professional musicians in Northeast Ohio. Union musicians add harmony to weddings, elegance to parties, and uplifting music for all events. Music Talent of Cleveland contracts solo and ensemble musicians as well as bands and orchestras for single engagements. So hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland today. 216-881-1802.
Now, back to Ed Flash Ferens with America's Workforce.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. I'll tell you, one of the things I really like to get into on this show is worker safety, and I think it is paramount. If you are not safe on the job, you really got to question that occupation, and especially now in the summer months, there's a lot of people in the field dealing with extreme heat. We have done a number of shows over the years here on America's Workforce. Today, we're going to focus on one organization, the Natural Resources Defense Council. And joining us is their senior advocate on environmental health, and that would be Juanita Constible. And they recently came out with, basically the guidelines on outdoor, indoor heat hazards and how workers, especially unions, how they can get involved and make sure that they are safe on the job. It's important. Safety is paramount. There's no doubt about that. Juanita, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into what you're doing at the Natural Resources Defense Council, talk to me a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in this. Maybe you can explain what the NRDC is all about and how proactive this organization has been over the years. Go ahead.
Sure. Thanks again. I'm so excited to be here today. So the Natural Resources Defense Council is one of the largest nonprofit environmental organizations in the U.S. We also have some branches overseas as well. And I would boil our mission down as trying to protect people and the planet from all the various threats that we face. Climate change is one of our major focus areas, and I'm actually a policy advocate within our climate adaptation division. As part of that work, I have been trying to protect workers from heat since about 2018, and I'm also broadly interested in heat preparedness at the local, state, and national level. So how do we keep people safe as our climate gets hotter, more extreme, and more dangerous?
Well, let's take a look at policy. I know in the previous administration, they tried to rein this in with certain heat standards. And obviously, different parts of the country reacted differently to this. I understand that. You know, people that are in the north are not going to have the same standards as those in the south. But when it comes to policy, what is the policy right now? I mean, let's talk about, obviously this should fall under OSHA, correct?
That's right. So right now, most workers in the United States do not have specific heat protections on the job. Only 7 states that have something on the books. And we also have national proposal, a federal proposal that OSHA put out under the Biden administration. But the fate of that federal standard is completely unclear. We have no idea if and when it will be finalized, leaving millions of workers across the country in the lurch in the meantime.
What are we looking at right now on behalf of the Natural Resources Defense Council? Do you have any, perhaps some voluntary guidelines that people should adhere to? There should be something.
Yeah, so we've certainly worked with Blue Green Alliance and our other partners and allies across the country to come up with the kinds of things that we want to see in regulations. But the fact is that voluntary guidelines are good and they're not sufficient on their own. Unless a union has heat protections in their contract, say, those voluntary protections tend to get ignored a lot of the times, especially when in seasonal positions or for non-union positions. So what we really want to see is strong enforceable protections on the books. And since we don't know what's going to happen at the federal level, that means right now we're looking at a state-by-state level. We're involved in campaigns in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, in New Mexico, and other states where there are decision makers that are forward-looking and want to make sure their workers get home safely at the end of every hot summer day.
Juanita, you mentioned a couple of states here. I'm just wondering, I'm sure you are privy to some of the legislation that they're talking about. Maybe we could get into some of that on the show, and hopefully, given time, maybe the feds in Washington will pick up on this, say, hey, I like what Pennsylvania is doing. I like what New Mexico is doing, things of that nature. But where are we right now? There's got to be certain guidelines that are being discussed right now to protect workers from heat.
There is a federal proposal that is actually based on what other states have already done. So California standard, Maryland standard, Oregon standard, for example, have really helped shape what the federal government has been thinking about in terms of a federal standard. So the states that are considering standards now, like Virginia, will help set the stage eventually for a strong federal standard, we hope. In the meantime, their neighbors are all looking at them to see what they're going to do. And we know that companies that operate in multiple states tend to do the safest thing that they're required. So if a company is in 3 different states and one of those states has a heat standard, that helps make the operation safer across all of the company's states. So there's a lot of looky-loo activity going on, and it's important for states that are developing standards to show how feasible it is to put something on the books and keep workers safe.
You mentioned unions, and obviously if there's something in a collective bargaining agreement dealing with that, and it does cover worker safety, a lot of the CBAs do. How proactive, in your estimation, are the unions on this issue right now, Juanita?
It really depends. We've seen unions like the Teamsters, like IBEW, like the steelworkers be really out front on heat standards because they know their members are being affected every day. The Teamsters really have been leading the charge in terms of raising awareness about this issue. And as you may know, they successfully negotiated a contract in 2023 that requires UPS to turn what is currently more like an easy bake oven into an air-conditioned, ventilated truck that keeps workers safe. SEIU is another union that's been really, and AFL-CIO have also been really out front. We see that where unions are intimately involved in developing regulations, in developing legislation, those states have a higher chance of success of getting something on the books because they have the backing of the unions, they have the important technical information from the unions. Rank and file members are great spokespeople for the benefits of strong standards.
Juanita, a lot of this is common sense when you think about it. You think about the farm worker, and I use that as a perfect example here because right now there's many parts of the country where, I mean, it's well over 100 degrees. The heat index could be 120 in some of those areas. You would think that there would be a rest break. You'd think that somebody would offer them a glass of water. Is any of that happening right now? I mean, you know how this country, I mean, capitalism is driven by profits. You got to work almost, in some cases, you got to work until you drop. You've got to have some numbers on that. I mean, how serious this is and has been over the years. That's why we're having this discussion. But I'm wondering, is there any common sense approach being discussed right now when it comes to a heat standard?
Yeah, I think that all the proposals on the books are common sense. The problem is we can't rely on people to only use their common sense. The most common sense approaches to heat standards are water, rest, and shade. You hear that all over the place.
Sure.
The problem is that there are some more complicated and slightly costlier measures that are also necessary. It's not enough to just give workers a popsicle and a cool break room and call it good. We also need to make sure they're trained up. We need to make sure that new workers are acclimatized so they have time to get used to the heat. We need to make sure that everyone's trained up on emergency procedures. One of the most heartbreaking stories I have heard in the last few years is a construction worker whose employer thought was taking illicit drugs because he was delirious with heat stroke. And because they called the cops first instead of 911, that worker died. That didn't have to happen. So what we really need is common sense plus some additional safeguards that might not be immediately obvious to workers or employers, like acclimatization, like emergency procedures.
I remember that story. I talked about that story here on America's Workforce. Yeah, they thought he was on drugs, but he was actually encountering a heat stroke and passed away as a result of that. Yeah, we should not let that happen. You mentioned employers here, and if you don't mind, I want to get into that. There has to be, just like any employer doesn't want a union in their workplace, they bring in the outside consultants. There's got to be a number of employers saying, we don't want any standards. We can regulate this on our own. You know what? This is a free country. Don't burden me with any laws. I'm going to be protective of my workers, obviously. That's a broad statement. But what kind of pushback are you getting on this? There's going to be a lot of pushback down the road, especially if it's going to be federal legislation.
Yeah, there's so much pushback. Unfortunately, a lot of that pushback happens behind the smokescreen of lawyers, too. It's not like we're hearing directly from the companies themselves, where they're part of these industry groups where they have very high-paid lawyers to make the same arguments over and over again. It's too expensive. This will kill my industry. I can't possibly get my crops picked, my building built, if you make me give my workers rest breaks. I'm already doing it. I hear that one all the time. We're already taking care of our workers. But the data and the stories we hear from workers tell a different story. And until every worker gets home safe, I will not rest on this issue. I will not accept that every employer is doing what they can when we know that heat stroke and other heat-related illnesses cease in the workplace.
Would you say that this issue, for lack of a better term, is catching fire right now? And because we're hearing, there's people that say there's climate change. There's the deniers of climate change. Bottom line, just look at the weather map and you could see the hot spots in the country, and that there's workers in the fields. You mentioned construction workers. You mentioned we talked about the farmers and all that stuff. I'm just wondering, though, with the current climate in Washington, I know it's going to be very difficult. You mentioned that states are going to, obviously taking it upon themselves to initiate some kind of standards. But is this discussion picking up in the legislatures, in your opinion? Obviously, you got an army of people over there at the Natural Resources Defense Council, but how do you see this panning out right now?
We do have an army, but I'm actually the only person at NRDC that works on this on a daily basis. So, we're seeing an increasing number of states really take notice of this, partly because of climate change, but that's not the entire reason. I think really workers standing up for themselves and saying, okay, we need this done, has been hugely powerful when it comes to moving legislators. The fact of the matter is, heat has always been a problem for workers. It's not just a climate issue. As long as there have been workers, heat has been a problem. And the first recommendation for a federal standard was more than 50 years ago, more than a half century. As the climate gets hotter, the urgency of this issue just keeps increasing. And while the federal proposal might still move forward, states aren't waiting to see what happens next.
Mm-hmm. Well, I stand corrected then. You're an army of one. How about that?
I have lots of good partners, thankfully.
Okay, as we wrap this up, Juanita, what's your message to those listening to the podcast right now that may be in an environment where it's getting a little too hot? They may not have a union to speak on their behalf. I'm sure a lot of people are in that category, but are afraid to say anything because they might lose their job. What would your message be to that person?
Yeah, the threat of retaliation is real. And I'm particularly sensitive to that right now when it comes to workers who are undocumented or who live in mixed status households. My message is that heat-related illnesses are preventable and that there are simple things that you can do in your workplace to help keep each other safe. One of them is make sure that you know the signs of heat illness and know what to do if your colleagues or yourself are having a heat emergency. Heat stroke can happen in as little as 15 minutes, so fast action is absolutely critical. And don't wait for your supervisor to say it's okay to call 911. Just do it if you think you need to. There are states all over the country that are making this a priority, and we need every worker's voices to your comfort level to get involved, to help shape the standards, to help say, this is what's happening in my workplace, and maybe even tell a story about what's working right so that we can help demonstrate that some employers are already doing the right thing, and these kinds of standards that we're talking about are feasible, affordable, and protective.
Very good. Yeah, there are some good employers, no doubt about that. Speak up before it's too late. That's a takeaway here. Juanita, thank you so much for joining us. Juanita Constible, she is a senior advocate for environmental health at the Natural Resources Defense Council. The website for them is nrdc.org, but you also should look for resources at this website, protectworkersfromheat.org. All right? Protectworkersfromheat. That's all one word, .org. Juanita, thank you so much for joining us here. I appreciate your input on this very, very important topic, and hopefully we'll make some progress in the years ahead. I know it's not an easy battle, but we're lucky to have you working on behalf of all workers in this country, okay?
Thank you so much.
And that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Tomorrow, the North Coast Labor Federation and the National Labor Office of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.